It was one of those nights where the city seemed to pulse with possibility. The kind where the rain falls just enough to make the streets glisten under the neon lights, but not enough to ruin your night out. I remember walking into the Copper Lantern, my favorite bar downtown, with this electric feeling running through me. Maybe it was the 3 shots of liquid courage I'd had at my friend Jamie's place before we even arrived, or maybe it was just the promise of escape after a particularly brutal work week. Either way, I was ready to let loose. The Copper Lantern wasn't your typical gay bar, which is precisely why I liked it. It had this perfect mix of people, some queer, some straight, all just looking for good drinks and better conversation. The exposed brick walls were lined with vintage movie posters, and the lighting was just dim enough to make everyone look like their best selves. The moment we walked in, the bass from whatever indie track was playing seemed to sync with my heartbeat. That's when I first noticed him behind the bar. Let me paint you a picture. Tall, probably 6'2", with dark hair cut short on the sides, but with just enough length on top to run his fingers through when he was thinking. He had this jawline that could cut glass and forearms that told stories of shaking countless cocktails. But what really caught my attention was his smile, the kind that made you feel like you were the only person in the room when it was directed at you. I didn't know his name yet, but I'd soon learn it was Alex. And I didn't know he was straight either, though my gaydar usually picked up on these things. But more importantly, I had no idea that this man would end up being the unexpected hero of my night, in ways I couldn't have imagined as I sauntered up to his bar with perhaps a bit too much confidence. What happened that night wasn't just about being cut off from alcohol. It wasn't even about the walk home that followed. It was about human connection in its purest form, the kind that transcends labels, expectations, and even our own self-destructive tendencies. It was about finding kindness in unexpected places and learning that sometimes the people who care for us most are the ones who say no when we need to hear it. As I approached the bar, I caught his eye, and he gave me that bartender nod, the universal signal that he'd be with me in a moment. Jamie and our other friends had already found a table in the corner, but I volunteered for the first round. Partly to be nice, partly because I wanted an excuse to talk to the attractive bartender. When he finally made his way over to me, his voice was deeper than I expected. "What can I get you?" he asked, wiping down the space in front of me with practiced efficiency. "For whiskey sours," I replied, trying to sound casual while simultaneously attempting to gauge if my slightly slurred speech was noticeable. If it was, he didn't let on. "Coming right up," he said, and I watched, perhaps a bit too intently, as he moved with this fluid grace, measuring, pouring, shaking. There's something hypnotic about watching someone who's truly good at what they do. When he returned with our drinks, he introduced himself. "I'm Alex, by the way. Haven't seen you and your friends in here before." "I'm Jordan," I said. "And we've been here, just probably not on your shifts. We usually come on weekends." He nodded. "Well, welcome to Tuesday night. It's a bit more laid back, but the drinks are just as good." He winked, and I felt my cheeks flush slightly as I carried the tray of drinks back to our table. The night progressed in that wonderful, hazy way that good nights out tend to do. 1 round became 2, which eventually became 4. With each trip to the bar, my conversations with Alex grew longer. I learned he was taking night classes in psychology while bartending full-time. He learned I was a graphic designer who had just been passed over for a promotion I'd been counting on. There was an ease to our exchanges that made me forget he was working and I was just a customer. Let me explain why these seemingly mundane details matter. In these small moments of connection, we build the foundations of understanding. Each piece of information we share becomes a brick in the bridge between strangers. And sometimes, these bridges become lifelines we didn't know we needed. By midnight, the bar had filled up considerably. The music had shifted to something with a heavier beat, and several people had cleared a small space for dancing. Jamie, always the first to hit any makeshift dance floor, had dragged our other friends along, leaving me to make another trip to the bar alone. This time, I was definitely past the point of hiding my intoxication. The room had that pleasant spin to it, and my body felt wonderfully disconnected from my worries. I stumbled slightly as I approached the bar, catching myself on the edge of it with a laugh that was probably louder than necessary. Alex looked up from the drink he was making, his eyes assessing me in a way that felt different from before. Not judgmental, exactly, but more concerned. "Another round?" I asked, trying to sound more sober than I felt. He finished the drink he was making and delivered it before coming back to me. "What are you thinking?" he asked, and there was something in his tone that suggested he wasn't just asking about my drink order. "4 tequila shots," I said decisively. "And maybe one for yourself?" I added with what I hoped was a charming smile. He leaned on the bar slightly, bringing himself closer to my level. "I think you and your friends might be good with water for a bit," he said, his voice gentle but firm. The suggestion hit me like a splash of cold water, though not enough to sober me up. "We're fine," I insisted, feeling a flash of embarrassment turn quickly to defensiveness. "It's not even that late." "It's not about the time," Alex said, already filling 4 glasses with water. "It's about making sure everyone has a good night and gets home safely." I remember feeling a surge of indignation. Who was he to decide when I'd had enough? I was a grown adult who could make my own decisions. Besides, I wasn't even that drunk. Or at least, that's what the alcohol was telling me. "Look," I said, leaning in closer, "we're having a good time. We're not causing problems. Just 4 shots, and then maybe we'll switch to water." Alex's expression remained kind but unmoved. "Jordan," he said my name in a way that caught my attention, "I'm cutting you off. But here's some water for now on the house." There's a special kind of humiliation in being cut off at a bar. It's not just about being denied more alcohol. It's about having someone else publicly declare that you've lost the privilege of making that choice for yourself. It's about having your lack of control exposed. In that moment, I felt like everyone at the bar must be looking at me, judging me, even though rationally I knew they were all wrapped up in their own nights. I took the waters without another word and returned to our table, where I explained to my friends with no small amount of bitterness that the bartender had cut us off. Jamie, who was nearly as intoxicated as I was, suggested we just go to another bar. Our other friends, Sarah and Miguel, exchanged a look that even in my drunken state I recognized as concern. "Maybe we should just call it a night," Sarah suggested. "It's already past 1, and I have an early meeting tomorrow." "You guys go if you want," I said, a bit too loudly. "I'm going to finish my water and then find somewhere else." The alcohol had transformed my embarrassment into a stubborn determination to prove I was fine. After some back and forth, it was decided that Sarah would drive Jamie home, while Miguel, who lived in the opposite direction, would catch an Uber. I insisted I was going to stay a bit longer, maybe sober up with some water before heading out. They were reluctant to leave me, but I was equally stubborn about not being treated like a child who needed supervision. Once they left, I sat alone at our table, nursing my water and feeling increasingly sorry for myself. The bar had started to clear out, with only a few die-hard patrons remaining. I was contemplating whether to actually find another bar or just go home when Alex appeared at my table, now wearing a jacket. "My shift just ended," he said, sliding into the chair across from me. "How are you feeling?" I shrugged, still holding on to a shred of resentment. "Fine, just waiting to sober up a bit before I head home." He nodded, studying me with those attentive eyes. "Where's home?" "West Side Apartments," I replied, naming a complex about 15 blocks away. "That's a long walk, especially this late," he commented. Then, after a brief pause, "I live in that direction. I could walk with you if you want." The offer caught me off guard. Part of me wanted to refuse out of pride, but another part, the more rational part that was slowly emerging as the alcohol began to wear off, recognized that walking home alone in my current state might not be the wisest choice. "You don't have to do that," I said, though without much conviction. "I know I don't have to," Alex replied with a small smile. "But it's starting to rain, and like I said, I'm headed that way anyway." Outside, the earlier drizzle had continued, creating a fine mist that hung in the air and caught the light from the street lamps. The temperature had dropped, and I found myself wishing I'd brought a heavier jacket. Without a word, Alex set a pace that was deliberately slow, accommodating my still unsteady gait. For the first few blocks, we walked in silence. I was caught between feeling grateful for the company and embarrassed about the circumstances that had led to it. Finally, I spoke up. "Sorry you had to cut me off," I said, trying to sound casual about it. Alex glanced at me with a half smile. "It's part of the job. Nothing personal." "How do you decide?" I asked, genuinely curious now. "When someone's had too much?" He considered this for a moment before answering. "It's not an exact science. Part of it is behavior, if someone's getting loud or unsteady. Part of it is keeping track of how many drinks they've had. But mostly, It's about looking out for people. Looking out for them how? I pressed. People come to bars for all sorts of reasons. He explained as we waited for a traffic light to change. Sometimes it's celebration, sometimes it's to be social, and sometimes it's to escape something. The problem is, alcohol only helps with that last one temporarily, and often makes things worse in the long run. His words hit closer to home than I wanted to admit. Wasn't that exactly what I had been doing? Trying to drink away the disappointment of being passed over for promotion, the frustration of feeling stuck in my career, the lingering loneliness that had been my constant companion lately? As we continued walking, the conversation shifted. Alex asked about my work as a graphic designer, and I found myself opening up about my creative aspirations and professional disappointments. He listened with genuine interest, offering insights that suggested his psychology studies were already serving him well. The thing about rejection, he said as we navigated a particularly puddle-filled stretch of sidewalk, is that we often internalize it as a statement about our worth, when really it's just a data point about a specific situation. I laughed softly. That sounds like something from a textbook. Maybe, he admitted with a chuckle. But that doesn't make it any less true. The rain had picked up slightly, creating a gentle soundtrack to our conversation. There was something strangely intimate about walking through the quiet, wet streets with this person who had been a stranger just hours before. The alcohol was wearing off, leaving me in that vulnerable state where emotions sit closer to the surface than usual. Can I ask you something personal? I ventured, curiosity getting the better of me. Sure, Alex replied, seeming unfazed. Are you straight? The question came out more bluntly than I'd intended. He laughed, not unkindly. Yes, I am. Why do you ask? I shrugged, suddenly feeling a bit foolish. Just wondering. You work at a bar that has a pretty mixed crowd, and you're walking a gay guy home in the rain at 2 a.m. It's not exactly typical straight guy behavior. Alex was quiet for a moment, and I worried I'd offended him. But when he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. I don't think kindness should have anything to do with sexual orientation. My sister is gay, and some of the stories she's told me about feeling unsafe or being harassed, they stick with you, you know? I just try to be the kind of person I'd want looking out for her. His answer touched me in a way I hadn't expected. In a world where interactions between straight and gay men are often complicated by assumptions and stereotypes, there was something refreshingly simple about his perspective. Kindness for kindness's sake. Looking out for others because it's the right thing to do, not because of who they are or who you are. We were about halfway to my apartment when the rain started coming down harder. Without hesitation, Alex removed his jacket, a weatherproof one, unlike my fashion-over-function choice, and held it over both our heads as best he could. You don't have to. I started to protest. Just accept the help, Jordan, he said with a laugh. It's okay to let people look out for you sometimes. Something about the way he said it, gentle but direct, broke through a wall I didn't even know I had up. I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, thankfully hidden by the rain on my face. How long had it been since I'd let someone take care of me, even in this small way? How accustomed had I become to handling everything on my own, to proving my independence at every turn? As we continued our rain-soaked journey, our conversation deepened. Alex told me about his own struggles, how he dropped out of college the first time around because of anxiety and depression, how bartending had saved him by forcing him to interact with people, how he was now back in school with a clearer sense of purpose. I shared more about my creative frustrations, my recent breakup, my fear that I was falling behind in life compared to my peers. There's something about walking and talking that encourages honesty. Maybe it's the rhythm of footsteps, or the fact that you don't have to maintain constant eye contact. Whatever it was, by the time we reached the entrance to my apartment building, I felt like I'd known Alex for years rather than hours. We paused under the awning, finally sheltered from the rain that had soaked us both despite his jacket's protection. There was an awkward moment where neither of us seemed to know quite how to end the night. Thank you, I said finally. Not just for the walk, but for everything. Alex smiled, running a hand through his wet hair. Anytime. Though maybe next time we meet, it can be under slightly drier circumstances. And with fewer public displays of my poor alcohol tolerance, I added with a self-deprecating laugh. Hey, he said, his expression turning serious for a moment. We all have nights where things get away from us. The important thing is having people around who notice and care enough to step in. As I watched him walk away, disappearing into the rainy night. I was struck by how unexpected the entire evening had been. I had gone out looking for escape, for the numbing embrace of alcohol and the validation of attraction. Instead, I had found something far more valuable, a genuine human connection that transcended categories and expectations. Let me explain why this matters. In a world that constantly tries to divide us, by sexuality, by gender, by politics, by countless other labels, there is profound power in these moments of simple human kindness. The straight bartender who cuts you off and walks you home in the rain isn't just a good Samaritan. He's a reminder that the boundaries we create are often more permeable than we imagine. The next day, nursing a hangover that was mercifully less severe than it could have been, thanks to Alex's water intervention, I found myself reflecting on the night with a clarity that surprised me. The embarrassment of being cut off had faded, replaced by gratitude for the conversation and connection that followed. I realized that what had initially felt like humiliation was actually an act of care, one that had opened the door to an unexpected friendship. 2 weeks later, I returned to the Copper Lantern on a Tuesday night. This time, I was completely sober and came alone. Alex was behind the bar, and the recognition in his eyes when he saw me was immediate and warm. "Jordan," he greeted me. "Good to see you again. Thought I'd come by and prove I can actually behave myself in a bar," I said with a smile. He laughed. "What can I get you?" "Just a soda water with lime," I replied. "I have a big presentation at work tomorrow." As he prepared my drink, we fell easily into conversation again. He asked about my presentation, and I asked about his classes. When he placed the drink in front of me, he refused to let me pay. "On the house," he insisted. "Consider it an investment. Improving people can change." That night marked the beginning of a friendship that defied easy categorization. Alex wasn't my straight friend, just as I wasn't his gay friend. We were simply two people who had connected on a rainy night when one of us needed help and the other was willing to provide it. Over the months that followed, our friendship deepened. We discovered shared interests in obscure documentaries and terrible sci-fi movies. He introduced me to his girlfriend, a warm, brilliant woman who quickly became another friend. I invited him to gallery openings and design events where my work was featured. When I finally got the promotion I'd been working toward, Alex was one of the first people I called to celebrate. The night he cut me off and walked me home in the drizzle could have been just another forgettable, embarrassing episode in my life. Instead, it became a turning point, a moment when I learned that sometimes our most meaningful connections come from moments of vulnerability rather than strength, and that kindness can find us in the most unexpected places and from the most unexpected people. So the next time you find yourself in a bar, or walking home in the rain, or simply moving through your day, remember that the labels we use to divide ourselves, gay or straight, bartender or customer, helper or helped, are far less important than our capacity to see each other's humanity and respond with kindness. Because sometimes, the simple act of walking someone home in the rain can change both lives in ways neither person could have anticipated. And if you ever find yourself at the Copper Lantern on a Tuesday night, look for Alex behind the bar. Order a drink, alcoholic or not, and take a moment to appreciate the connections that can form when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, to accept help, and to see beyond the categories we use to understand the world. You might just find, as I did, that the most meaningful relationships often begin in the most unexpected ways. Total_char_count, 18,267.